I'm just concerned. You're welcome. The next submitter, Otaki Sports Club, Adam Shelton.
Fishing game?
Oh, but I thought, they did turn up. Oh, that's right.
Put them in at 1:15.
Yeah, welcome. Phil, welcome. So if I do that, yeah.
He's reeling you in.
Sorry, I'll talk quicker. Oh, sorry, I'll talk quicker if you start banging the time thing, but I'll do it rather quickly. Okay, so I'll take the submission that we made on the 10th of May as read. My name is Phil Teal, Regional Manager for Wellington Fish and Game Council, and we're responsible for essentially the sports fish management and game bird management and the fishing net, hunting net result from those. So if you're just following the general format of the submission, the first part is relating to implementing initiatives to address water contaminants. This is as much an awareness aspect that the new NPS 2020 and the National Environmental Standards basically will have a different way of looking at things with Te Mana OTY, pretty much driven by regional councils, but the district council should have an awareness of how the community values are incorporated and how to address those from a district point of view. So just one aspect which I'd just like to highlight on the stormwater discharges is I understand that there's been money set aside in a long-term plan for stormwater management. A lot of that will probably be for existing flooding areas and also for new developments. One of the things which I would like the council to consider as an emphasis still is to make sure that there's no wastewater infiltration of the stormwater system. And that's something which is ever present as people hook up to the wrong pipe, or intentionally or unintentionally. And it's what happens is you get a decent rainfall flush, and those essentially end up getting into the river. And there's been occasions where in the summertime where you've got cyanobacteria in the river and you shouldn't be using it, followed by a rainstorm event which takes away the cyanobacteria, but then you've got the stormwater that's contaminated and you can't use the water basically for recreating. So that's something which it's having a continual plan and not relegating it to a sort of a general maintenance lower priority. It's something which should be undertaken with vigour and with a focus. Okay, the other thing which can be incorporated into stormwater design is what they call sensitive urban design. It's being a bit more innovative, but at the end of the day, it's this council's done some good work on promoting capture of rainwater in the from the roofs and using that as a water source. But also having swales as they're going into the drain pipes themselves. You can have you can slow down the pulse of any flood event, and also some sediments can drop out there. So the other aspect is promoting wetland restoration, and it's self-explanatory there. It's something which has been really promoted in other countries like Australia and in the UK, the US and Scandinavian countries is to use wetlands to help as kidneys of the land to reduce the sediment and the nutrients. It's basically the riparian planting probably isn't going to be enough for land where there's been major land use change, which is almost everywhere, because there's only about 3% of wetlands left in the Wellington region in total. Okay, so the other thing I'd encourage the District Council to do is support land management initiatives as the catchment management programs take off. So you're supporting landowners and other groups to basically improve the waterways. And also, just on public access, is actively promote public access to the freshwater resource, and as far as fish and game mandate is for freshwater fishing. So if there's there's areas which can be utilised for freshwater fishing that all attempts are made to assist with that activity. Just one question on the this is actually quite a large document for an LTP, considering I'm doing probably about 10 of these around for district councils and two regional councils. Just one aspect on, there's got quite a lot of detail in it, on page 10 and 11, just relating to the Mana Whenua Council partnerships. Just have a Fish and Game are doing a lot of work on the space on partnerships with iwi and how to develop that in the future. But I'm just sort of wondering, as a public document, I feel I'm a little bit perplexed with what that diagram of the flax there. I understand the aware of the saying, but having the regional council referred to as a grandparent and essentially the ratepayers and the stakeholders as children, I think there needs to be a bit more socialising of what the council is trying to achieve through those partnerships and how they relate. Just it sort of doesn't really come across clear to me, and I'm working in that sort of environment, so it's just something to be aware of. I don't know whether you've had any other feedback, but I think it's critical and vital that the community has an understanding of how it all works together, and we can be progressive as a community. Okay, so that's all the points that I want to emphasise. So if there's any questions, I'll take those unless I'm over time.
Questions? Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Phil. Good to see you again. I'm just wondering, what sort of presence does Fish and Game actually have in the Kāpiti coast?
There's actually the trout fishing from Waikanai, Otaki rivers and in the short run rivers is well recognised and well appreciated by anglers. The duck hunting aspect is probably more on private land as you move up the coast, but it is still quite an important recreational pursuit for a lot of people on, from Otaki north basically is where the main areas are. And I suppose the other thing, just with the Waikanai River, I know that there was 8.5 million set aside for restoration. I mentioned that in the submission. I'm still not quite aware of how that's going to be divvied up and the plans for it. That's 6 months on from when it was announced, and I'm also aware that there's quite a major flood protection desire to take out 60 to 70,000 cubic metres of gravel from round about below the state highway bridge, basically to meet their flood control standards. At the moment, they're right above what their aim is for a particular level of return flood. And while there's $8.5 million to do work around the river itself as an ecosystem is going to be extremely disturbed, and it'll be essentially a catastrophic effect on the river bed itself. So it's something that the district council should be aware. It's not just putting things around the edge of the river; it's what's in the river, and that's going to be a major issue in the next 5 years, or 2 to 5 years.
Councillor Holbrook.
Yeah, thank you for coming along today, and well done doing all those submissions. One is enough for most people. Well done picking up too on some of the issues with the flax diagram. That was something that came through our consultation with Ngāti Toa. So thank you for that. Just you mentioned the impact of urban development on river ecosystems, and then you reference in your document here the Three Waters projects and the reform that's going on there. Has Fish and Game also got its eye on other legislative changes? I'm thinking of the urban development and the resource management reforms. Is that something that? Yeah, we've got our eyes on so many things. Wouldn't be funny. Yeah, the RMA changes. We've got the MPS implementation. We've got the National Environmental Standards. There's obviously the local government review, how that pans out. The Three Waters, how's that going to be implemented in the lower North Island?
yet there's lots of things on the boil right now, and it's something where if you've got any insights and be able to make it public, I think that would be really good for the community to understand how these changes will affect them.
Yeah, and vice versa. Thank you for all your work.
Councillor Boswell.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for coming in today. I'm just wondering whether you had been in contact, or KCDC had contacted you about the destination strategy going forward, and perhaps where you might play a part in tourism and so forth.
Well, no, we haven't been contacted about a particular program of interest on that. But one of the things that could quite easily be developed on a relatively small and manageable scale is adjacent, or I'd say adjacent to the lake at Otaki, the Windstones area, having essentially a fish out pond there, or a fishing pond there for people who have. I mean, it has really good access when it's not a working site, and in future it probably will be open most of the time, and that will provide access for people who haven't got such good mobility, including and particularly older people who have indicated that they really need places where they're not clambering up rivers anymore. And you could make it into a relatively confined area and essentially have a put and take fishery there for almost not guaranteed success, but one which you're going to have a pretty good chance of getting some sort of value out of it. As far as the wider aspect of freshwater angling, we promote that within our angling fraternity, and it's quite a strong club on the Kāpiti coast. But I would also be absolutely open to promoting fisheries where they can sustain it, such as the Otaki River and those sort of places, which when you drive over, you don't probably think that's a great trout fishery, but it's pretty good. It's a bit like the Hutt River. It's world-class fishery, but people drive past it every day, and it's because it's so highly modified, it just doesn't seem to have all those values that you'd tick the box for a great trout fishery. But you've probably got 80 fish per kilometre in the urban areas, all the way from the top of the river down to past Melling. So outstanding fishery. It's just hard for us to promote it.
That's fantastic. And I really enjoyed the fish out day that you had at the Otaki lakes a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Just on that area and I guess the lack of facilities there, would you be in support of a toilet being put there and some kind of amenities there for the public?
Anything to make it a sustainable experience, I think, is certainly worthwhile. And it's I won't get into the debates of where to put toilets, not to put toilets. I know that's pretty sensitive around Kāpiti on exactly where to put them on the walkways and things like that. But in the near vicinity would be useful, or at least being able to know where to go. At the moment, it's still a little bit constrained by the working environment that they've still got there.
That's great. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much. No other questions. Thank you for coming today and presenting your submission.
And thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
It stretches far and wide. The next Otaki Sports Club, Adam Shelton. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much for giving Otaki Sports Club the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I'd first of all like to acknowledge the large amounts of work that councillors and staff are having to complete before the end of June to get all this work done, and I'd also like to acknowledge all the hard decisions and the big decisions that you guys are making around things like rates and housing, infrastructure and COVID recovery. So our proposal, or our project, it's a project now in terms of the club, definitely doesn't fit into those sort of big decisions, but we feel that it is one that offers many recreational pathways to a wide group in our community, and we just wanted to present a bit more information to you. I won't go through the submission that we put in, but I'd like to focus a little bit on the district plan and how we feel our project fits in to the district plan, in particular to some objectives and standards. So objective 2.8, building or strong communities, and objective 2.17, open spaces and active communities. So our proposal is, as you've seen, for court lighting around our multi-sport courts. And through that we can offer increased opportunity to use the park or Harutai Park facilities. And in doing so, that gives us, quoting from the district plan, greater connectivity to local and community services and facilities, which is important. And this will also in turn lead to, once again quoting from the district plan, improved health outcomes through opportunities for active living. Our development will also help ensure that the present and future recreational needs of the community are met. We note that Harutai Park is surrounded by land which is zoned future urban development to the north, the east and the west of the park, and that south of the park there's housing development going on at the moment. So from that we can anticipate quite a bit of growth in population in Otaki, and we feel that enhancing Otaki's key sports and recreation hub, which is Harutai Park, to help enhance amenities for this growth in population seems to us to be a good investment. So we're not requesting anything for a small group or for a closed group or a select group. The courts that we use are open to the public. So we are a sports club, but we share the courts with the public through an agreement with the Parks and Recs people at council. So as well as sharing them with the community, we also give back to the community quite a lot. We offer free tennis coaching on Wednesdays after school for kids, which we've been doing for a number of years and is very popular. Otaki is not a high-income area, and the uptake of that has been good. We just get kids coming along and their families after school, and we offer them free coaching. This year we also started what we call a club day, because that's just the standard term for it, but it's open to the public. So every Sunday from 1 till 4 during the summer, we hold an event where we supply all the equipment, so all the rackets and all the balls, and we welcome everybody in the community to come along, and we organise all the games for them, and we give them afternoon tea, and we just provide them with a fun and social and very healthy and outdoor activity. That's something that we started this summer, and we will be continuing again next summer. Good fun. So we originally submitted our submission back in December. Since then, we've progressed a fair bit, and we've put some skin in the game, I think is the cliche. We stumped up $1,200 to put in a resource consent, and excitingly for us, 5 days ago we were granted the resource consent, so we now have permission to put the pylons around the court. So there's 6 12-metre pylons with 2 LED lights on each pylon, and we're looking forward to continuing to fundraise for that, and we're now in the process of approaching funding providers to help get us through to the end of the project. It's a roughly $100,000 project, and we do acknowledge that you, as I said at the beginning of our speech, that you guys have many pressing and important funding issues to weigh up in your deliberations, but we think that our project does have merit, and we would really welcome any contribution that you felt able to make to the project. I think in our original submission we said, council funding it would be fantastic. We do acknowledge that that's probably not viable, but anything that we were able to get from council would be much appreciated. My last point is that when we started off going for the resource consent, we met with the Parks and Recs guys, and they told us that no matter how it was fundraised, that 100% of ownership would go back to council for the pylons. We can definitely understand the value and importance of that, because clubs can't really afford to pay for in general, pay for the upkeep. So we do value the fact that Kāpiti Council will be looking after the upkeep, but we would appreciate any form of partnership in fundraising for these assets. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks
questions?
for listening.
Councillor Pravano.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for coming along today. And it sounds like, well, I've actually been up there, and it's really great to see that the the work that you're doing there, and particularly some of the initiatives in the tennis area. So I suppose this is a more general question. In terms of the sports facilities in Otaki, do you think Otaki is well serviced, or do you think there are some big gaps there?
Well, speaking to our experience, we're a multi-sport club, so we have 3 codes: tennis, squash and football. They're all highly active. The teams have been increasing. So last year we had 1 tennis team, this year we have 2. Last year we had 1 football team, this year we had 2. And the new football team is a women's team, which is very exciting for the club and very exciting for the players in it. And we're giving them a lot of publicity and prominence in the club, and they're really enjoying their new season. Last year we had 1 squash team, this year we have 3 squash teams. One of those squash teams again is a women's team, and I think that's the first time in 20 years that we've had a women's squash team, so that's a good development for the club. The local cricket club is also based out of Huruatai Park, and they come and use our club rooms. They're not a code which is a member of our club. We'd love them to be, and we do have discussions with them around that, but at the moment they just feel happy coming and using our club rooms for their prize givings and things like that. Across the road we have the Domain with the rugby and things. So Otaki does have sports facilities. Sport is a very important part of a small town like Otaki. Lots of people are involved, and we just feel that court lighting would really help to enhance what people can do and increase what people can do. I think, as I mentioned, the courts are multi-sport, so it's tennis and futsal. Futsal is a 5-a-side court-based football, mainly played in winter, so in the evenings they can come and play. So that's probably where I see sport at the moment in Otaki.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? Councillor Coates.
Thanks for coming along today. I don't think we've met in person, but possibly you've spoken on the phone.
We have.
What I'm interested to know is, regardless of the application today through the LTP to council, that the club will be seeking funding externally, and simply what you're asking for is whether council could contribute to what is a significant investment.
That's a very good summary. Yes, we went through the resource consent process because we feel strongly about moving the project forward. That was for a small club, that was a significant expense, and a lot of time is involved. We enjoyed the process working with council, learned a few things about how to get that done, and came out the other end with a successful result. And I was talking through my presentation today about the areas of the district plan where we feel the project fits into, and that's because new knowledge that I have, having gone through the resource consent process, I was able to tie in what we're doing with the plan. So I just thought I'd bring that along today. But yes, the way you summarised it is a good summary of what we're hoping to achieve. Yeah.
Councillor Buswell.
Thanks for coming in today. It's not really so much of a question, but I guess something to be highlighted. Yesterday we heard from the Youth Council, and one of their priorities was about lighting in our district. And the ability for youth to be able to go out and be physically active in their basketball courts, or, as your case is, tennis courts. So it's definitely something that we're aware of that can certainly help different sectors of our community. So thanks for bringing it in.
Yeah, great, thank you. And just very quickly on that point, one of the points that we noted in our resource consent, just working through the district plan, was that lighting in open spaces enhances and increases safety. So we think that's a good thing, that people can come down to the park at all hours of day or night and have a safe environment for taking part in active recreations. Yeah.
Councillor Pravanov, another question?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So with the way the lighting would potentially work, is it after hours for members of the public, is it actually use as you pay, or do they automatically come on? And I suppose, who pays for the power?
That's a very good question, and that's something that we're trying to work through at the moment. So the lights won't automatically come on, they'll have switches. We're envisaging the switches inside the club rooms, but that's a good point, is that the courts are public courts. And so the club is going through a discussion at the moment about how we can let the public access the courts in the evening. We don't have the money to pay for the electricity, so at the moment we're talking with our Sparky about options like a token-operated device somewhere, or a coin-operated device, or prepaid cards that they can purchase off us. We have an answer for that at the moment, but that's something that we will have an answer for by the time the lights are put in. So. Yeah.
I think the Waikanai Beach Tennis Club has a coin-operated
system. Oh, cool. Thank you. I'll go and have a chat to them. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam, for presenting your submission today.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening.
Kerry Walker. Welcome.
Hello there. Last time around, 3 years ago, I was privileged to speak to you on basically the same issue. Basically the affordability of rural rates and how there is a big disconnect between the rates paid and services received in the rural areas. In 2018, my rate increase was 18%. It's 3.8 times the average increase. Imagine my delight this time round to have an increase of 21%. That's only 2.7 times the average this time. That's a 42% increase in 2 rating rounds. An extra $42 a week I have to find just for this period alone. This is in the context of a much smaller than average land holding in farming terms. Picture this. I start work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I work through till 10:30 at minimum wage. Then I can go stop for morning tea knowing I have finished working for the council to pay my rates. So that's a third of my working day, 640 hours a year at minimum wage to pay for my rates, just my rates, every working day of the year. Now, Federated Farmers used to give out a coffee cup called a 10K cup to farmers who were members of the 10K Rates Club. Of course, that's been discontinued because they couldn't afford the cups anymore. How many people have to pay over 10K for rates? The council must use more of the universal annual charges to the legal minimum of 30% to better apportion rates to services used, and perhaps to look at rural-urban differential adjustments. Times change, and nothing is more constant than change itself. But in 1919, when our family first started farming in Te Horo, who would have envisaged the cost of rates would become a driving factor into determining where land can be kept in traditional farming land use? Just as an aside, and for our previous speaker that's already left, there used to be 13 dairy farms on Beach Road. I was the last one. I closed down the dairy shed last year, so Fish and Game will be very happy anyway. That is all fine if the end goal is a patchwork of housing covering all available land, but it's not my ideal, and I think maybe many in the community may agree. Thanks.
Councillor Coates.
Kerry, thanks for coming along today, and I know you and I have had much conversation on the side of the road about this topic. In hearing you speak today, would you welcome a further review of the rating, our current rating system, and the way that we apportion the rates? And so you talked about the different fees and charges, and obviously impact on rural charges. There's a discussion that we've had, and it's around how far and how fast we go in terms of the rating system. So is that something that you think that we need to look more closely at?
Of course. I mean, you've just answered the question by asking it. But, I mean, my farm, a little dairy farm, I mean, the reason I went out because it was uneconomic anymore, basically. I support myself. I'm the only person there. no workers, and I'm paying over $12,000 a year in rates. Where's the equity in that? You know, this is one person, one family farming unit. And what services do I get that could portion, you know, I mean, my increase this year of $2,200 plus is more than a lot of people pay in rates, full stop. I mean, where's the equity? I don't have footpaths, I don't have street lighting, I pay my own pickup of my own sewage, my own water. Okay, you know, so I don't get very much for what I pay. I pay heck of a lot of money in roading. Not most of the money is in roading. And of course, I've got a lot less people on my road for roading. But basically, the thing is, you know, I think that because of the way the population growth is going, I'll be forced to sell because my land value's got so high now, as you can tell by my rates I pay, that I can't afford to run it as an economic unit. So it's going to have to be sold and subdivided. Now, you know, like I said, our family's been here for a long time. I'm also Maclean, so I used to own part of the airport until you guys sold it. So without offering it back to us original owners. Anyway, that's another question, of course, another story. But we've been here a long time, and now we've been basically forced off our land in a lot of respect, because I can handle inflation, but 2 rates increases of basically 40% in 2 rating rounds. I mean, does anybody here have the same sort of value increase?
Thanks, Kerry.
Councillor Buswell.
Thanks for coming in today, Kerry. Could you just let us know whether your land is classified as productive soils or any classes there?
No, it's not prime land. It's a cave from the beach, and 2/3 of it, well, up to at least a half of it, floods quite regularly, so it can't be built on. We've got sandhills that you can build on, I suppose. You can build on, of course, but it's not productive, good dairy farming land or all farming land, full stop.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pravana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming along today. So, does your property run through the Mangoni stream at all?
Yeah, I'm bordered all the way along the Mangoni.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, so with your rates, and I certainly understand what you're saying in terms of your rates going up and having a large area of land and not potentially getting as high a service per hectare or per square metre as what residential people do. But in terms of your rates going up, has the Greater Wellington part of that gone up to a greater degree than what the KCDC part has gone up? Particularly, I'm thinking more about the flood protection and some of the, you know, the effects of the stream.
Well, I mean, we do get one of our drains cleaned out as part of the council, though the regional council. That has been discontinued for the last 2 years because they were so up in the air about the 3 waters and everything else that they put everything on hold. So basically, 30 hectares or 20 hectares of my farm has been unusable the last 2 years because it's been underwater. We are retiring 20 hectares myself on own volition and replanting the whole lot as wetland, which is, I mean, great because that's where it used to be way back in the day, at my cost, of course. I mean, I think as I've grown older, I realise that conservation is a far more important tool than I thought about when I was younger, when I was sort of chasing the dollars. But your life changes and debt profiles change. You can do those things later in life. But if I can't do that if I have to pay these sort of rates.
Yeah, so back to my question in terms of whether the KCDC proportion of the rates has gone up much higher than the Greater Wellington portion, or whether or not they've gone up to a same degree.
Well, it's on the rating valuation, so I presume they've gone up proportionally the same. I'm not too sure how it works. I haven't actually done the breakdown. I mean, when you see those big figures at the top, and your increase is going to be $42 a week, you're just about, that blows your mind to start with. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Hi, look, Kerry, thanks for coming in. You know, I hadn't realised just how high the impact would be on rural properties of these LTP considerations. So thanks for bringing that in. Just about your comment that Greater Wellington stopped the drain clearing, and I know because we've worked hard to make sure that your drains have been cleared over the years, but where as a council under the instructions from government that while the Three Waters stuff is under consideration, it's completely business as usual. So I would love for you to be going back to them and saying, hey, guess what you heard today? Business as usual, come and clear your drains. You know, winter's coming now. But my question for you is your property, and I know where it is it part of the rural village that had a big rates increase to bring it in line with urban areas 10 years ago, or is it purely rural?
Mine's purely rural. I think you'll find that what you're talking about was south of the Mungoni stream.
Okay.
And up on the plateau, you know, that sort of area there. We're off the below the escarpment, so
yep.
Being our flooding risk and everything else, I don't think that would have been included in our place.
Okay.
But just on the Wellington Regional Council thing, I'm on the Farmers Reference Group. We meet
yep.
monthly. One of the UX councillors is involved in that too, Penny. And so they run a lot of things through us. Bloody good idea, actually. You should actually look at this. Run through ideas for us so that before it gets put into legislation or regulation, we can fine-tune and say they're not practical and things like that. So it's a very good idea. But anyway, so we've been talking about this for ages, and I've obviously I've got a conduit into there. So I've talked to the people that make the decisions, like Wayne O'Donnell and people like that. But even then, it took me a year and a half to get. We still haven't had the drains cleaned yet for since prior to COVID. And like I said, it's made a hell of a difference to our farm. It's just
Will do.
Yeah.
We see that. Okay, Harold, thank you so much for coming in today.
Councillor Boswell.
Sorry, just another question. Picking up on the fact that you are replanting some of your area and reverting it back to wetlands, are you aware that there is actually a rebate scheme that the council have for planting? It's a certain percentage of your land area. If you plant it back, they can somehow give you a rebate. Might pay to have a look at that.
I have progressed that through the Wellington Regional Council, and they have been fantastic. Actually, I must admit, full kudos to them. They've been very supportive of what I've done and supplied a lot of plants at cost or with a rebate system. So I haven't actually talked to the council here.
We do a similar thing here as well, so it might pay just to look into that.
Yeah, well, the projected cost all up is over $1 million.
Yeah.
So.
Also includes fencing.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm including everything in that, of course. So.
Mr. Walker, thank you for your submission today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
Bob Hargreaves, next submitter.
Yes, I'm here to talk about the elderly housing rent increase proposal. Firstly, I wish to thank you all for this opportunity to speak further on that matter of what is tantamount to a 50% rent hike Council have planned to take effect this coming August for its elderly tenants. The rent elderly tenants currently pay is proposed to increase from $113 per week, which is on average 30% of the average superannuation income of $425 per week, to $170 per week, which will equate to 40% of their superannuation. Council have quoted government guidelines and would be aware this increase is 10% more than the government recommend for rent purposes. I've previously submitted objection to this rent hike during our previous meetings, as I am aware this proposal has caused many elderly tenants considerable distress, and as one elderly tenant asked, could this be staged over a longer time frame to allow time to figure out how she could absorb this massive increase? I was appalled at the council response, which was to merely offer information sheets as to where to go to get financial help. Council advised they're implementing this 50% increase to achieve 80% of their costs. As a result, I requested and was provided with an income and expenditure report which covered the past 4 years, which, although devoid of specific details in terms of costs, I was nevertheless able to determine council received on average for the past 4 years income $2,619,998 from the elderly tenants. The expenditure was $3,626,086. This income equated to 72.25 of the targeted 80% of cost council are endeavouring to achieve. I respectfully suggest this equates to a 10% increase in income as required and not 50% increase as proposed. Further to the above, the report also showed an 11% drop in income over the last financial year compared to the average income over the previous 3 years, which with respect gives rise to council needing to raise rents. Again, with respect, I believe the 11% drop in income rents is a direct result of council adopting a renovation program which has resulted in now having 11% of the 118 units empty for relocating the elderly during renovation. Again, with respect, this program is not only detrimental to income but also disruptive for the elderly tenants. I've made previous submissions whereby the units could be renovated as become vacant during the short period they vacant prior to reletting. I conclude by respectfully suggesting 1. Achieve 80% target through raised income from 80% to 100% occupancy rate. 2. Adopt a more sustainable and less disruptive renovation policy. 3. Maintain the council housing team salaries to within 50% of the income. 4. All profits generated be utilised for funding more housing for the elderly. And again, thanking you for this opportunity to make my submission. I also wish to express gratitude to former council for providing the community with such a valuable freehold asset enjoyed by the elderly community. I look forward to your response with considerable interest. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Coates?
Here.
Bob, thank you for coming along today and speaking to your submission. Like yourself, I'm concerned at the proposed increase that you've got in your submission. I'm not sure that those figures are correct, and I've asked for the Chief Executive and staff to clarify that for elected members.
Yeah, no, I was just taking them directly from, I did make submissions prior to it, and all I had was basically the rents paid. I can calculate that, but I don't know where the expenditure goes to. But because I was given basically a summary of the last 4 years' income and expenditure, the figures that I concluded. We only need a 10.8% rent increase if things stay stable as they are.
So we'll follow up on that, because I said I'm not sure that that's correct. But what I did want to ask you is, are you aware that the upgrades to the units were not only unbudgeted in the sense that their money was brought forward by council, but was at the request of the tenants to the chair of the community board? So there was a number of tenants there unhappy about the state of the units, and through advocating through the community board, it was agreed to upgrade those units.
I'm not sure the few that would have asked that question would equate to a 50% increase for the remainder, but my suggestion was previously, because the units are probably relet at least every 15 years, it's at that point when I think $20,000 could be spent per unit. I did give the figures what that breaks down to percentage-wise.
I'm happy to have a chat with you offline, but I don't think it is quite that simple. And one of the examples is the units actually don't come up that frequently.
Can I add something to that based on what you're saying? For those that don't like numbers, may I explain this as simply saying that I am but one of the 118 drips of water that fills the council bucket each year, which the council can draw from at the rate of 118 drips per year, so that the bucket remains at a constant level. However, with council reduced numbers of drips going in from 118 to 107, as they have done by the renovation program, then why would council want to make each drip a 50% bigger drip when all that is required is to make each drip 10.8% bigger? Or simply fill the units to achieve the 10 drips shortfall. Now, I've got those figures, and it does show that if it is increased by 10.8% and there was 100% tenancy, you'll achieve 84.75% of the income required to cover the cost, which is it's never been said you want to achieve 100% increase, but if you did want that 50%, basically would equate to you having 108% of the cost, if that makes sense. I know they're numbers, and yes, I think the only way to go is nut all this out, but I certainly repudiate any claim that 50% increase is required by tenants.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex than that, but in 2019, $733,000 was spent on refurbishing those units, so $20,000 a unit, but I'm happy to have those.
In 2019, yeah, I think there was about $153,000 drop in income, though, on the same year. So something's going wrong. There's got to be a drop in tenancy. Sure, I know the expenditure's escalated, but at the same time, tenancy's dropped. There's two things that answer that. There's a lot of money being spent on the units, but it's with a drop percentage. And I can only suggest that's because there is empty units. My suggestion is fill them up and have, 118 drips. Thank you.
You have an offline conversation. Councillor McCann.
Kia ora, Bob.
Thank you.
No, Bob, you've still got a couple of questions, and I'm not going to refer to you as a drip. I think.
Thank you. I don't mind being a drip, but I was 118.
The reality is, one of the things that I can let you know is that in this LTP conversation that we've been having, I asked for the numbers of how many empty flats we've got, and I still haven't got that, so I could remind staff that we really do need that to have that discussion. But we also are very conscious that our renovation policies need to be as unobtrusive as possible, and I think we'd like to make sure that we have a chat offline about that as well, so we make sure we feed as much back as possible. One of the question I have for you is that one of the things that we are looking at as a potential in our housing policy is increasing the number of those senior flats. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yes, certainly. I've stated there that I'd like to see any profits made from this going to building new houses. There's a lot of reasons for that. It actually promotes jobs, the whole thing. Yeah, I'm fully supportive of that. If there is a massive rent increase, I'm sure there's going to be a massive profit. Yes, go to that.
So one of the things with that type of redevelopment is that there is, one view is that some of the accommodation that we currently have is quite spacious in terms of there's extra land, not the actual houses. Do you feel that there's an opportunity for infill and better development? No, my unit's 34 square metres. You can actually fit 4 units into the average 3-bedroom house. I think the 2019 figures for an average 3-bedroom house is 156 square metres. So technically, you've got 4 tenants, albeit separate from one another, accommodated in a 3-bedroom house. It's 4.35 units in an average 3-bedroom house. But having said that, I live in one of them, and I love the surroundings. I'd love to, well, certainly the council staff are down regularly to check on the mode. Sure, they were built some 40 years ago, but they built well. And I honestly think that because they are freehold, there's no need. I'm sure we've got to take advantage of the fact that they are freehold. Use that. Don't go losing it by people are going to have to leave if they've got to try and meet those costs. But yes, I've suggested that cap the salaries at 50% of the income. That still leaves a massive surplus for doing the renovation programs. I would think that $20,000 every 15 years probably only equates to about 25% of the income. We'll certainly look into some of those costs, and thank you very much. And it's good to hear that you've got some really positive comments about the staff who do check up on the service.
Thank you. Will I leave these copies here?
Yes, thank you.
Hold on, Councillor Prabanov. Bob, can you wait?
I'm sorry, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got another question for you, and thank you very much for coming in today. And obviously, you've spent a lot of time in preparing your submission. It's really interesting. So you made the comment a couple of times that people would have to leave potentially the costs went up too high, what alternatives do people have?
I don't know. I just trying to get the feel from the community, and there's a lot of stress going on around there. And 30% of the, I mean, let's face it, they're on superannuation. It's $847 a week. The government say that the minimum wage should be like $20 an hour or whatever. So 40 hours a week, what's that? $800 a week. Superannuators only get half of that. So you know, I'm not suggesting yes we can meet all these demands by doubling the superannuation. That's just not going to happen. But that's the situation that the elderly are actually in. That's what we've got to live with. And sure, we appreciate the fact that the council have got these units. And like I said, I've got gratitude to the councils that built these units some 40 years ago. A lot of them were built in the 70s, but they've been built well. And I think, yes, as a council, we can build more. I think we can keep within. I honestly think that what is actually being paid now, $113 per tenant per unit, is sufficient income to cover the costs. But somewhere along the line, you've got to slow the tap down that's leaking the bucket. I think that 118 drips going in, you've got to keep 118 going out. The minute you start trying to get 150 drips going out, you're going to have to turn more taps on. And what's actually being suggested at the moment is the ratepayers are putting another 10 taps into the bucket, if you like. I totally disagree, and I'm offended by that suggestion that the ratepayers. In fact, I go as far as to say that if that's happening, the ratepayers are actually subsidising the council's wages by the same amount. Playing around with figures, I mean, that's all we're doing. 10.8%, I think,
Councillor Elliott.
could be done, but I think the other way to do it is reduce the costs. And unfortunately, you're spending a lot of money too quickly.
Bob,
Bob,
we got another question.
Hi, Bob. I won't take up too much of your time. I'm Councillor Jackie Elliott. Look, I do feel personally responsible for any angst you're experiencing right now, because staff brought to us with this process some decisions to be made. This one, the rent increase possibly on the social housing units. We had three options. One was a zero increase. I think the other one was to 50% of market rates and then 80%. So we made a decision here to go out at the top rate. So here's hoping that by the time we get to June the 24th and we make our final decisions, that would have been renegotiated around the table, and that will be going right down anyway. And certainly your submission really helps us with that.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I can understand why you get to the zero. I can see that. I can see why you get to the 10.8. I've gone through the figures myself. But what I'm suggesting, when you put it out there, there's going to be a 50% increase. A lot of people are upset, frightened, and that's really why I'm here, to be honest. Probably those two things I need to say.
Bob, thank you for your submission today.
Thank you, sir.
Taking the time to present it yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next submitter, low carbon Kāpiti. Asher Wilson Goldman. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor and councillors. Good to see you all again. So I'm going to focus today on a couple of bits within our submission. Obviously, you've all hopefully read our submission and may have some questions on some of the other issues we've raised, but I want to focus today on two particular things, housing and transport. And I'm going to focus on housing and transport because, to me, they're symptomatic of not only what kind of a district we want to be in terms of climate change and how we're going to take real climate action, but also symptomatic of the type of district we want to be for the people who live here. And ultimately, that's what you're all here around the table for as councillors and as community board members. You're here to say and to decide and to determine what kind of a district we want to leave for our families. Where do we want to raise our kids? Where do we want to work? Where do we want to play? And where do we want to live? And ultimately, when we boil it all down, transport and housing are two of the key factors here. They both obviously impact significantly on our climate. In the last couple of days, we've seen central government release a green paper looking at transport options for the future, looking at how they can meet their climate goals and the target of net zero carbon by 2050. Likewise, here in Kāpiti, the council is looking to meet goals of net zero carbon by 2025, an ambitious goal and one which us at Low Carbon Kāpiti commend you for making, and commend you for stepping up and actually making it happen, not just saying that you will do it, but coming up with concrete plans to make it happen. But unfortunately, what we do in our own homes or in our own workplaces or in this council is not the whole picture. We know that climate change is a global phenomenon, but we also know that it doesn't respect boundaries, it doesn't respect normal areas of work. And so what we're asking as Low Carbon Kāpiti is for you not just to think about the direct carbon costs of council activities. So not just the way you heat our council pools, and we commend you for putting in money to the Otaki pool upgrade to help lower the carbon emissions of that. Not just how your staff and you drive around this district when you need to for work, and we commend you again for looking at options to increase the electric vehicle uptake for council staff. But also, how do the decisions that you all make as a council impact on the climate emissions of our district as a whole? Because ultimately that has a much bigger impact than the decisions you make about the climate emissions that are the direct responsibility of the council itself. And so when you're thinking about housing, when you're thinking about the council playing a bigger role in housing, what I want to say to you is that sounds like a great idea. We have a housing crisis in our country, in our region, and in this district, and we've just heard some of the impacts of that housing crisis here. But what does that mean in terms of where we choose to build? What does that mean in terms of how we choose to build? Where we're creating new neighbourhoods through things like the regional growth framework, where we're creating those new neighbourhoods, what kind of houses are we going to build there and how are people going to get around? Are we going to create dormitory suburbs where people go through their house to their indoor access garage, into their car, drive to Wellington, do the opposite when they come back at home at night, they're in their house and actually they don't spend any time in Kāpiti. While they may technically live in Kāpiti, really their lives are lived in Wellington City. That's not what we want, and I don't think that's what anyone around this table or in this room would want. What we want to create is a community where everyone feels welcome. And we know that the way to do that is to make smart transport decisions. The way to do that is to make smart housing decisions so that people work and live locally and they actually live their lives here. Their kids cycle to school. They walk to the train station if they do have to go into Wellington and catch an electric train. If they don't have to go into Wellington, they can walk or cycle to their jobs in the district. And they can do that because you as a council have set up and made the rules and made the decisions that where new subdivisions go in, they have to be connected to all of our local amenities via active transport. You've made the decision as a council that where we're building new subdivisions, where we're building infill housing, we're building it along the railway line, we're building it along the bus routes, we're building it along the cycle paths, and actually we're not building roads as our first priority with active transport as an afterthought, but instead we're building it to build community with active transport and public transport at its heart. Roads may be an afterthought. What we need is a mode shift and a significant step change in our district, and that's what Low Carbon Kāpiti is calling on you to make those decisions. When you're thinking about our roading budget, think about it as moving people, not as moving cars. We know that moving people via public transport is significantly more efficient, more effective for both our climate and our community than lots of people in single occupancy vehicles. We know that kids going on bikes to school has all sorts of benefits for their education, for their health, and for our communities, rather than being dropped off in the mad school run down the Raumati Road that you see every morning. All of these things are possible, but they need you to step up. They need you as a council to say, actually, we want to create a community that's built for people. We want to create a community that's built for all of us together to cooperate and to live good lives. And if we do that, then actually climate solutions are there. This is the great thing about climate change, about actually taking real action on climate change, is that it doesn't only benefit our climate. It benefits all of us and helps us to live good lives. And so for me, when you're thinking about this long-term plan, and when you're thinking about all of the other important work that you do as a council, that's what I'd like you to think about. Not how can we help the environment, and then how can we build roads, and how can we build houses, and how can we do all of the other things we want to do, but actually, how can we do all of this together, looking at it holistically, so that everything benefits our community and our people. So, thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you. This is an excellent paper. in my opinion. And my question to you, there's so many questions I could ask you, but about council-controlled organisations, would you like to expand what your view on council-controlled organisations is?
So I think for me, the question in the long-term plan on council-controlled organisations felt a little bit premature. To me, I would have rather seen a concrete example of what the council would be proposing to use a CCO for, and then we can assess whether or not it's the best result for that. Because ultimately, it has to be based on outcomes for me. So you look at what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and then what's the best vehicle for that. But when it comes to climate, I think it's really important that we make sure that if the council does decide to set up a CCO, whatever that's used for, whether it's for housing, the airport, something else, buying a giant flock of alpacas who can roam the streets and cuddle children, whatever you want to use a CCO for, the emissions that are the responsibility of that CCO have to be counted as part of the council's climate emissions. We can't outsource or excise those emissions into another organisation and say, actually, it's their problem. If the organisation is a creature of council, then council has to be responsible for what it does, and council has to be responsible for the emissions it creates.
Councillor Coates.
Ashley, good to see you again, and your impassioned approach around low carbon submission. The question I have is around public transport. I don't agree with most of what you've had to say, and as Councillor Rana said, great submission. But we've submitted to Greater Wellington, who are responsible for public transport 3 times in 2012, 2 times in 2014, once in 2015, twice in 2016, once in 2017, 2018, and more recently this year, and I spoke to Horizons as well around PT. So something that we absolutely agree with you. My question is, are you doing as an impassioned approach to GW, who ultimately have to create smart transport to go along with our smart housing?
Yeah, so we have made a submission to GW's LTP, and we are continually talking to them as well.
Are you speaking to that submission?
No, because I believe they're happening today, unfortunately. But we are continually talking to them, and I agree that KCDC has been a fantastic advocate for better public transport to Greater Wellington, and really I do thank you all for that. As we all know, they don't always listen. And in particular, it's not also just them. We also have to put some of that onus on government, central government, in terms of its funding profile. I think with the Climate Commission report coming out, the draft report already coming out, and the final report coming out later this year, with the green paper that the Ministry of Transport put out in the last couple of days, we are starting slowly to see a shift from central government, which, if it continues, should result in increased funding, which makes Greater Wellington's job a lot easier, which makes our job and your job a lot easier in terms of advocating for that. The key will be making sure that, particularly for your ward, that when those conversations are coming up at Greater Wellington, that our voices are the loudest, because we know that the Wairakapa train service is also in dire need of investment. It's had some, but it needs a lot more. But the electrification to Otaki and beyond up into the Horizons area is of critical importance to the future of our district. We need to be looking north as much as we look south as well. Looking north to the Horowhenua and up to Palmerston North in the future, both for jobs and for community connections. So it is obviously critical, and we are continuing to advocate.
The second question I had was around, I said I agreed with most of what you had to say, was around, and it's not the only submission that's talked about backing off in terms of building roads. But what's the view or position around hybrids and EVs? Because I know it puzzles me, this whole thing around, roads. The rail option that we're talking about from GW is 5 to 6 years away. Even if the green button was pushed today. Roads? EVs?
Look, I drove here today in an EV, so, there are always going to be single-use vehicles. There are always going to be single-occupancy vehicles on our roads, but the key is that we need to be thinking about those as mopping up what's left over, and for the people who genuinely need it. There will be people working night shifts, and we will probably never have overnight trains from Kāpiti into Wellington, or maybe we will one day, but it'll be a long way away. There will always be people who do need to use vehicles, and where that is the case, then we need to be incentivising and supporting EVs and other things. But what we have at the moment is a system that looks at cars first, and everything else is second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And we need to switch that around in order to be really making the best use for our climate. Because one train, you see this every morning when I do go into Wellington, one train that's an electric train going from Waikanai into Wellington can carry far more people and races far past all of those cars on the road. So actually, by incentivising and improving our public transport and our active transport options, what that does is it takes cars off the road and reduces congestion for the people who genuinely do need to drive. So it actually makes the experience better for everyone.
Thanks, Asher. As long as that train hasn't broken down, but I agree.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I won't ask you about trains because I think we're of one mind on that. I wanted to ask you about, in your submission, you talk about low carbon Kāpiti supporting KCDC bringing waste collection back in-house, and you talk about green waste and recycling. Do you think the model that Hutt City Council has followed in the last couple of years, where they've gone out and consulted on their community, they're looking at the prices are between $249 a year, $344 a year for each house, build onto rates, and it has wide public support. Do you think that provides a model of how KCDC could actually look to bring rubbish and recycling collection and green waste collection back in-house?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could. I think that there are a few different ways we could look at it. But I think one of the key things, and I heard this, I've heard this before when I've talked to people about waste, is they say, oh, but that will just go on rates. And I've heard this from people around this table, and that's absolutely true, it will. But we need to think about this in terms of a total cost to households. It's not a total cost from council, it's a total cost to households, because we're ultimately the people that pay. So at the moment, we pay our private providers however much we pay, differing depending on where you live in the district and how much waste you produce. But we pay our private providers. So if that money is just rolling into rates, that's great. Rolling it into rates as well gives you the option to charge people, and I think we talked about this in our submission, charge people who currently freeload on the system. We know there are a whole lot of weekenders and Airbnb owners who don't live in this district, who don't pay the private providers for rubbish bins and make use of dumping at council bins on the side of the road. I see it quite often, all the time. Those people should be subsidising the people who live here. If they want the benefits of having a weekend home in Kāpiti, they should be subsidising the waste collection for the people who actually live here full time. And I make no apologies for saying that. I think it's entirely reasonable and fair. Otherwise, they can vacate their house and one of the people who are desperately trying to live here full time can buy that off them. I think if we're looking at, and the reason why Low Carbon Kāpiti has taken a position in favour of bringing it back in-house is not necessarily because we think it is more efficient or cheaper, even though overall I think it will be in the long term, but it's because that gives us control, and that's the one thing we're lacking at the moment. We have one provider who, not that long ago, brought in a green waste option, and that's good, but it's a pretty lacklustre green waste option, and it actually doesn't meet the green waste collection that we have, for example, in Christchurch City. But it's only one provider, and the others don't do it. These sorts of things are the things that we could actually bring and mandate across our district if we had it in-house. And for me, that's the key, is actually taking back control, taking back responsibility and saying, if we as a council and if we as a district want to move towards waste reduction, waste minimisation in our district, then we can't outsource that problem. We can't make it the problem of private providers. We have to take ownership of it and say, actually, this is something that we're going to deal with ourselves. We're going to, as a district, take the step up and say, this is our problem, we've created it, and we're going to fix it.
Thank you.
Councillor Holbrook.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for coming in today and speaking on behalf of Low Carbon Kāpiti. It's a question that I've asked some of the other community groups. How did you consult with your community group and how many members do you have? And I just heard you say, I think, quite a lot during this submission today, and you're speaking on behalf of an organisation, so I just wanted to clarify how that worked.
Happy to. So we consulted our membership via our newsletter and via our Facebook group. We received a number of emails and messages on Facebook from Low Carbon Kāpiti members, of which there's around about 236 at the moment. It's gone up actually as a result of this submission that we shared and the submission guide that we shared online, so that's really nice. I know that a number of other people have used our submission guide as well in their own personal submissions. So that was really positive to see. But so we received a number of bits of feedback. We took that in our Low Carbon Kāpiti committee, which meets once a month. Considered all of that feedback, thought about the other issues that we wanted to raise, and there are things that we've raised in the past, because nothing in this submission today is necessarily new. It's things that you've all heard from other people wearing the low carbon Kāpiti hat over the number of last many years, both in formal settings like this and in informal conversations. These are issues that are well canvassed nationwide as well. You know, similar to what our counterparts in other parts of the country are submitting to their own council long-term plans.
Yes, I was actually thinking about the issue in particular, which is local and is kind of new, and that's about whether council should have a role in the airport. Yes. And we did have a submission from somebody yesterday talking about how, with the future of electric-powered air travel and freight transfer, that smaller, more frequent airports would be required for that green future of air travel. And I wondered if that was something that had been taken into account by low carbon Kāpiti in coming to that position.
We've looked at it. The consensus around the table when we discussed it was that those sorts of things, while they may be possible in the future, are so far away that actually it's not a practical, for us, we didn't feel it was a practical consideration for what KCDC should be doing now about the airport here. In particular, for us, as low carbon Kāpiti, and we've spoken about this in the media before as well, is that we strongly support the local hapu having their land returned to them and for use as they see fit. If they chose to retain it as an airport, that's their call, in our view. That's not our call to make as a predominantly Pākehā organisation. Having said that, I think where we were looking and where we've been talking about in the context of the airport is actually ties into what we were talking about with Councillor Coots before about the improving the electrified public transport, because if we've got electric trains through to Palmerston North, and if we've got electric trains through to Wellington Railway Station coupled with some sort of light rail through to the airport, then travelling to either Palmerston North or Wellington airports becomes a low carbon option in and of itself. And so the overall carbon emissions profile for a trip to Auckland, for example, is no different from Paraparaumu Airport as it is from Palmerston North or Wellington airports, once we've got those low emissions methods of public transport in place. And actually we already do largely to Wellington Airport, or will once the new bus starts up next year.
Look, last question from Councillor Pravna. Very quickly.
Thank you, Asher, for coming along today. So, you talked about smart houses and smart transport and, being taking into account climate change and being climate friendly. You also talked about living and working locally, but then you talk about transport out of the district to work. So has Kāpiti got any ideas on how we can actually start industry or be a hub for people to work rather than having to leave the district to meet some of those goals?
Well, I mean, certainly they're not mutually exclusive. So improving our local public transport requires construction work. Improving our local housing requires local housing construction work. There's a whole lot of local work that can be done by improving our local communities. Beyond that, in terms of long-term work rather than infrastructure projects, it's not really our field necessarily. I think the reality of where we're located in Kāpiti and where compared to Wellington and Palmerston North is that there will always be people who will commute. But what we've seen in our local businesses, many of our local retail and hospitality business will attest to this, is the increased amount of working from home since lockdown has actually been a real benefit for a number of our local businesses. So even for those people, and I'm one of them, who still largely or often work in Wellington, we are living more of our lives out here now than we probably would have been 18 months ago.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asher, for your submission.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and presenting it yourself. The next person we've got is Charlie Cordwell from Surf Life Saving New Zealand. You here? Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your time. At Surf Life Saving New Zealand, we always welcome the opportunity to come and talk about what we do, because it's a true pleasure to be able to keep the ratepayers and the visitors to the Kāpiti Coast safe on the beaches during the summer. I'd like to start by saying a very sincere thank you to the Council. The funding that we've received in the last 3 years has provided us with a solid platform and some surety which allows us to be able to plan going forward for the summers in question. It allows us to be able to confidently start to recruit our lifeguards early on. It allows us to be able to train people and takes away a lot of the headaches associated with providing the service during the summer. Now, this was especially prevalent during the last summer, obviously, with the unknown quantity around COVID. We were expecting a considerable increase in the volume of beachgoers, given New Zealanders were liable to be more to be holidaying at home. And that was actually the case. So it meant that we could, if necessary, and we did, put a little bit of additional resource on the beaches. At the end of the day, although it caused a little bit of a cost blowout, it's all about saving people's lives and also keeping people safe on the beaches. So thank you very much indeed. The focus of my submission today centres around what the ratepayers of Kāpiti Coast are actually getting for their money. And I think that's important. Value for money is very important indeed to us, tailored also with the quality of the service which we're actually delivering. Last summer we did 4,000 patrol hours across Paikokariki and Otaki, and we had a 30-day service. Approximately a third of that was funded by the Kāpiti Coast District Council. That was about 1,200 hours. On top of that, 2,700 hours were delivered by our volunteers on the weekends. So if you like, and I've used this before, for every hour that's paid for on the beach by the council, the ratepayers are getting an extra 2 hours for free, if you like. So we consider that to be excellent value for money. We do a lot of work in and around what we call preventative actions. So in a funny way, if we have to rescue somebody, we feel like we've almost failed a bit. The message clearly hasn't got through that around water safety. And what we mean by preventative actions is we're actively looking for opportunities to educate the public on staying safe in the marine environment on the beaches that we're talking about. And we think that's very, very important. So people are aware of things like how to spot a rip and sun smart and swim between the flags and don't get out of your depth and all that sort of thing. We're finding more and more that with the changing nature of New Zealand's population, and we have more different cultural groups, that very often immigrants to New Zealand, mum and dad may have never been to the beach. Mum and dad might have never learnt to swim. And with schools closing their pools, our role as educators and bringing people up to speed with the risks associated with the environment is important. Notwithstanding that, we encourage people to come down to the beach. It's a healthy lifestyle. Mum and dad and the kids coming down, spending the afternoon, in the fresh air, staying away from electronic devices, as my kids have done in the past. We consider that to be incredibly important. Wherever possible, we are employing local youth, and that's people who have been trained. Lifeguards generally, a vast majority of them are university students, but they come from the local community, have joined the local surf club, and then they're trained up and through a rigid recruitment process get to work on our beaches as well. Quite apart from the service that's provided by yourselves and by the clubs, we're also running a thing called Beach Education. Beach Education is a program, in-schools program, where we take primary school children out of school for the day and we do a full day on the beach, educating them on some of the key messages that we're trying to get across in terms of safety on the beaches themselves. It costs $15 plus GST for a full day at the beach and is supervised by our trained lifeguards. And that sits as a separate entity to what we're talking about today. So I suppose the key message is, look, thank you very much indeed. We would request that the level of funding which we've received in the last 3 years continue. My submission allows for a small CPI increase in the next 2 years. It doesn't make provision for the potential for the living wage, but that might have to be another discussion should the council go down that track at a later stage. And we'd ask that funding level continue, and that will enable us not only to continue to provide the service at what we believe to be an extremely cost-effective price, but more continue to improve the quality of the product which we're delivering on the beach by the constant training of our lifeguards and the upskilling of them. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I can take a few questions if anyone.
Questions? Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Charlie, for coming along today and giving us a really good breakdown of the work, really important work that you're doing. I suppose, and I see the last point you've got in your report is about reporting, and so I suppose what I'm looking at is the whole district. So obviously, there's 2 areas in the Kāpiti coast that have beach patrols, and probably the other 2 have larger populations but don't. So has there been any conversations around extending that lifeguard facilities?
We are, as some of you may or may not be aware, we've recently received government funding, which is helping with the costs associated with running the clubs. On top of that, it's provided some funding for what we call renew our aquatic risk analysis. Basically, what some scientists do is they'll go into a particular area and reevaluate what the actual need is for the service relative to a range of different factors, including population growth. Where are people going? Are they going to Waikanai? Are they going to various different? So that I expect to be undertaken next summer. And that could provide a basis for saying, well, look, we need to extend the service, or it could well mean that we take the existing service and customise it relative to the demand. I doubt that will happen, but I suppose the answer to your question is yes, but we don't do it unless we do it based on scientific evidence or qualitative analysis, if I've got that right.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Coates.
Just to reiterate the appreciation for the service that Surf Life Saving does. What I'm curious about, and it might be a difficult one to answer because there might be different models or delivery around the country, but does Surf Life Saving receive similar amounts of funding from councils that do have Surf Life Saving services on their beaches?
Yes.
So it's pretty consistent.
As a rough rule of thumb across the 7 councils that I'm dealing with, the service is paid for 30 days, as you are for 2 beaches, and the funding levels are similar.
Okay.
Not exactly the same. I would probably put Kāpiti Coast in the more favourable position in terms of the support you do give us, but there's not much in it either way.
Cool. Thank you.
There have been instances we've had to cut the service back because of funding issues, which we don't like doing, but that's not the case here.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Cordwell, thank you for fronting up with your submission today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Right, we've got Kāpiti Disability Advisory Group, Joanne Deacon. Welcome.
I've chosen to use sign language in recognition that last week was New Zealand Sign Language Week, and also to highlight the fact that this is a submission from the Disability Advisory Group. And I noticed that there's virtually no accessibility being met here today, if you like, which probably goes to my point of part of my submission. If there'd been an interpreter here, you would know that I signed that my name is Joanne and I'm autistic and deaf. And I'm here to talk to the case for a disability strategy on behalf of the Kāpiti Disability Advisory Group. I was actually asked if I would consider bringing a New Zealand Sign Language interpreter here today, and I seriously considered that request. The reason I haven't is because there is a local interpreter here who lives in Kāpiti. She's had a personal tragedy, so I didn't really want to ask her. But in addition, it would have been, once again, disabled people having to adapt and meet our own accessibility requirements, and actually removing it from Council's obligation to meet that under the UNCRPD, which is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the Disability Convention. I know you have a copy of my submission, and I hope you have had time to read it. I recognise that a disability strategy will not achieve everything that I want to see on the ground in regard to total district-wide accessibility, or even total council accessibility. But what I am hoping it will achieve are 2 things. Firstly, a recognition that disability and accessibility is not just around physical infrastructure. It's not just about those who have obvious, visible impairments. It's about recognising the invisible impairments as well and catering for them. I don't look deaf or autistic, but I am. And as I mentioned before, there was no catering for accessibility requirements today. But I'm one of the lucky disabled people because I can manage without them. Secondly, I want a mechanism of accountability because at the moment there is none for local disabled people. And there needs to be, so that we can point council back to meeting their obligations under the Disability Convention. But it's not just the council, it's others in the community. The New Zealand Government has agreed to follow the Disability Convention, and to help meet the obligations, the Government adopted the New Zealand Disability Strategy and the Disability Action Plan. And while there's no requirement for local authorities to give effect to these documents, the Strategy and Action Plan does acknowledge that local authorities have a significant impact on the lives of disabled people by the decisions they make. And it is for that reason that many councils have implemented disability strategies for their districts and cities. The disability strategy provides a way of thinking about disabled people who live in this community, beyond leaving it all to disabled community groups or the council's disability advisory group, or even beyond just thinking about public infrastructure. The strategy can be used to guide council decisions on considering the impact on people with disabilities. It can also be used by community groups and businesses implementing initiatives that enhance the well-being of people with disabilities. It can provide a bigger picture of disability awareness beyond training sessions. Having a local council disability strategy can focus on how KCDC can directly contribute towards reducing disability in its district. This issue of disability is a large one that affects us all because at any time people can acquire disability, and it is common with ageing. Every part of our community will be affected either directly or indirectly by the issue of disability, and we must address this as a matter of importance if we are to be considered an inclusive society. A disability strategy can set a vision for an inclusive Kāpiti where everyone has the opportunity to participate fully in the community. I was thinking about how many deaf could participate here today without reasonable accommodations, how many with learning difficulties, how many autistics, even how many disabled people saw themselves in that long-term planning document. I'll wager not many, yet we make up 24% of communities. The social model of disability holds that disabled people are not so much disabled by their impairments, but rather by the barriers in society. KCDC is responsible for maintaining, managing and developing key public assets, such as roads, parks and halls, and delivering services, such as building and resource consents, events and community development, that enhance the quality of life of all the communities they are responsible for. Therefore, this council was able to play a major part in reducing the level of disability in its communities. But it needs a disability strategy that recognises disabled people as members of its community and advances their rights. So that's all I have for you today.
Thank you. Question time. Councillor Rendell.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Yeah, very good presentation. And I just wondered, what do you think is the number one, how council can address your number one issue? Now, in your submission, you say accessible information on the council's website. Is that what you regard as the most important thing that council could be doing?
Wider than just the website, I would say, and all of council's communication, for example, and it's one I've raised with council many times, and as far as I know it still hasn't been actioned, the fact that every time they post a picture on social media such as Facebook, they do not put alt text or an image description of a photo so that people who are blind actually cannot tell what the picture is. There's nothing to tell them. But I raised that issue personally with the Mayor, I've raised it personally with council staff, and yet here we are months later and no change. I keep being told there's a new website coming. That'll be just as useless if they don't actually understand that their attitude in not doing the little things can be very hindering for a disabled person. That actually creates a barrier to start with.
Councillor Coates.
Joanne, thanks for coming along today and speaking to us. And my apologies that we haven't adequately considered accessibility even in the process through these hearings. And so certainly you speaking to us today has been helpful to understand that better. My understanding is from your submission that the thrust of it is around a disability strategy.
Yep.
And my question to you is, reading from your submission, that there is some already in place in councils around New Zealand, correct?
Correct. So I'm aware, I think Tauranga has one. I know Napier has one. Napier's one is a lovely visual one. Christchurch, I think, has one. Wellington has one.
And so the reason why I ask that is, it does my head in when we redo strategies and things from scratch. It was like the Easter trading policy. There's many out there at other councils. Could it be, given the pressure on council in terms of its policies, that we look at a good one within the country and seeing if we can adopt that within our district rather than reinventing the wheel?
I would certainly agree with that, and I think that would be up to council to have a look at which ones that they think might fit. For example, Wellington City being a big city, you might have a look at that one and think, that doesn't quite fit for our community. Napier's one, you might look at it and think, hey, that's really good, it's simple, it's a one-pager, it's, impactful. So, yeah, I would recommend council look at the different strategies and themselves. There's at least half a dozen. I think New Plymouth has one as well. Have a look and see which ones you're comfortable with and say, hey, well, this could be the starting base. Is there anything we want to add or remove? Because it's kind of to provide a vision. It's not setting out the work program. It's just a vision.
Sure. And look, I apologise at the start when you introduced yourself in sign language. I wasn't looking. Ironically, I just read a post on the council Facebook page which had someone asking about disability access to a recent playground design. So what you're saying was actually just evident at exactly that point.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Buswell.
Thanks, Joanna, for coming in today. Great to see you here. And also great to see that you've stepped up to fill some pretty big shoes from Sue Morelli that would normally be standing in your shoes today. So thanks very much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, reiterate too, we've heard some similar feedback from the Older Persons Council in terms of even just the layout of the LTP document was difficult for a lot of older people to read and understand. And also in terms of policy, I think the age-friendly policy that is being worked on at the moment in the community will also feed into potentially a disability policy. So there's a lot of work being done around that disability and help for people out there. So as a question, did you realise that this is actually on live feed? So people that have the ability to see it online and have those different applications that they can use can access this forum today and yesterday and tomorrow?
Yeah, so for example, I did access it online. I accessed the submission form online for another part of the long-term plan. Yes, but I would suspect you will find that, just touching on age-friendly, that older people would find that a challenge to access that online. In my experience, online is also challenging for many disabled people who may have limited internet. If you're on a budget, you're on a budget, and often internet, you might do Facebook, and that might be the limit of it in reality, because unfortunately many disabled people are more likely to be on a benefit and more likely to face financial constraints. So I appreciate that. But also, we're talking about fully participate, so that means that any disabled person should be able to come here today and be able to fully participate. Now, I realise that not many people find at council meetings exciting, but there's also not that opportunity either. There may be people who have learning difficulties who might really relish coming along and learning about council and being wanting to participate. And I think of Sir Robert Martin, who became who's on the UN committee for persons with disabilities over in Geneva, and he's a person with learning difficulties, quite obvious learning difficulties if you met him. By that I mean intellectual disabilities, and yet he's been able to rise to that occasion to fully participate in society. And I would like to see Kāpiti be able to offer that here, but I don't see it yet. So I guess I see the strategy as a way to maybe make our commitment to disabilities, the pathway, a bit clearer for people.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Joanna, thank you for coming here and making your submission in person. Much appreciated.
All right, thank you.
On that note, we are now in afternoon tea break.
Councillors, at the previous break there was a request for the submission from the previous annual plan. I've got that submission if you'd like a copy of it.
Have a disability focus. I mean, I don't even know if the council has a disability policy. Does the council have a disability policy for its staff? I usually find I ask that question and everybody goes, I don't know.
See, I actually do know.
No.
We should know.
We should know.
Because your previous person, Susan Morelli, was pushed it left, right and centre. I'm sure there must be one.
I wouldn't guarantee it.